All right, Ken. All right, Ken, you ready?
Sure.
Got everybody here.
Where's Dennis? Okay, so I wasn't the last one.
He was marked gone.
Huh?
All right, Ken, I'd like to call to order the Thursday, June 9th, 2016 Board of Adjustment meeting. Roll call, please.
Dolly,
Here.
McGuire,
Here.
Shriver,
Here.
Arnold, Stein, Hanson,
Here.
Albertson, Johnson and Stobarger are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the May 5th, 2016 minutes. Could I get a motion in a second?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. McGuire.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dolly. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the agenda is the applicant Marlin West of Midland Builders. Permit number 16771 is seeking a conditional use to allow a three-family unit located at 612 East Kempt in an R2A single-family residential district.
We got most of that done. To allow for 3 dwelling units in a 2,338 square foot residential structure originally designed as a single-family dwelling and located on a substandard 6,600 square foot parcel in the R2A single-family attached residential district, contingent upon compliance with specific rules, governing individual conditional uses, and other conditions that the board deems necessary. 3 and 4 family dwellings is a listed conditional use of the R2A single-family attached residential district for 21-1804 and 21-16-032, contingent on compliance with minimum lot area dwelling units and other ordinance regulations listed below. This request conflicts with 21-1001 and 21-0302 on the lot size, no building structure. Yeah, well, so basically, again, this is a lot in the R2 district, and this is an older home, and it's been 3 apartments for a while, and now basically he just found out that that was not a conditional, has not been granted a conditional use to be that in the zone. So he's here asking to make a thing. He's got enough parking to meet all the requirements for the 1 per bedroom parking requirement. It does not meet the minimum dwelling unit requirement of 2,200 square feet per dwelling unit in the R2 district. But if this was in the R3 district, it would meet it easily.
And it's the lot size a little small, but it's kind of a retrofit. It's been this way for a long time, and it's just shown up now that it's probably not compliant.
That's correct.
All right, I'd like to open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the
And again, it was public notice.
conditional use.
And nobody contacted us for or against, so.
Is that one of those over there that looked like it'd been remodeled a little bit lately?
It has been remodeled, yeah.
So it should be up to all codes, the internal codes as far as electric
Yeah.
wiring, all of that. It's just in a part of town that's been used that many years, but we just have now found out that it isn't
best of my
compliant with the
knowledge,
zoning. All right. Is anyone here to speak on behalf or against the conditional use? If not, I'll close the public hearing, ask for a motion and a second for discussion. Motion by Mr. Arnold. Second by Mr. Dolly. Any other discussion on? Anybody have any questions for him? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Anything in old business, Ken?
Not for me, thank you.
Need a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Stein. Second by Mr. Albertson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
You don't have to say that's what Rich told me. Yep.
Yeah, this week, the first week.
Rich told me that just the other day.
Alrighty, Luke, are you ready? Right, Luke, you ready to go? I'd like to call to order the Thursday, June 9th, 2016 Watertown City Plan Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Dolly.
Here.
McGuire.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Arnold. Here. Stein.
Here.
Hanson. Here. Stonebarger is absent.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Could I get a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. McGuire,
Second.
second by Mr. Hanson. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 21st and the May 5th, 2016 meetings. Could I get a motion? Motion by Mr. Stein,
Second.
second by Mr. McGuire. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Third item on the agenda is the northerly 18 feet of South Lake Drive, lots 6 through 27 in the Aaron's Park Edition and vacation.
I will take it from here if that's okay. The action in front of you right now is be a recommendation of approval of a vacation or right-of-way. It's described on the petition as a northerly 18 feet of South Lake Drive adjacent to lots 6 through 27 of Block 2 Aaron's Park Edition. There are 15 property owners who have signed this. I will spare you reading all of them and say that we've got 15 signatures on this. Representative is here if there are questions. Where this comes from is, well, I'll give you an idea. You know where South Lake Drive is, but this is across from the Prairie Winds Golf Course on South Lake Drive, south side of the lake. And it is a stretch of approximately 1,000 feet of South Lake Drive, which was initially platted around 110 years ago. The petitioner was advised by a planning commission that the board would not consider vacating a portion of South Lake Drive unless all the adjacent landowners signed. In this case, it's a stretch that you see on this map. This is a representation only, and I'll get into why that is in just a moment. South Lake Drive is a collector street in this stretch. Right away west of this stretch is 70 feet wide. East of this property, it varies between 50 and 88 feet. In this particular location, currently it is 88 feet in width. To give you an idea, collectors were typically asking for 70 feet is what we have been lately on those, if this were a newly platted lot. We have had some updated information on where utilities are and with reference to actual property lines. I'll get into that in a second. But again, as I said, vacating 18 feet would leave 70 feet of right-of-way. After this went out, a little bit more information was gathered here and has come to light. And primarily what we found is that, as I said, the property was initially platted in 1908. Pins to find are difficult to find on surveying it. It hasn't been resurveyed, at least not as this whole stretch hasn't. So what we've got is, we're aware that they were notified to gather these signatures. Those property owners gathered their signatures. About somewhere between 5 and 10 structures on properties are located within the right-of-way as it sits today. The reason I say somewhere between 5 and 10 is because we're not able to find where the survey is at this point. And so what we do know is there is a property that's been surveyed there, and that's where we're at right now. So without knowing exactly where the right-of-way is, we would run the risk of potentially vacating property that would actually put the road itself into private property, which is a bad idea, obviously. So I just kind of want to go through the potential actions that you could have, and you'd vacate it as requested, but it runs the risk that I just noted, plus utilities could be there without easement. Reserve the entire area as an easement. However, if you do that, then there's no building in that area, and those structures that are there are illegal anyway. You could vacate different dimensions for different lots, which is probably a good idea, but at this point, we don't know exactly what those dimensions would be. You'd vacate right away for some, but not all lots, which would be a good idea, except that in the end, a lot of these are going to need to be vacated at some point. And 88 feet of right of way is more than we would typically have anyway. Could deny it, but then we still have to handle what do we do about the existing structures. Recommendation, at least out of staff, city engineer and myself, is I probably want to table this action, give us a couple of weeks to come back, try and find out, get a better feel for where exactly property lines are, and figure out how much we would need to vacate, and come back and discuss this in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Do I need to open the public hearing before we table it? I'll open the
I
public
would,
hearing
just in
if
case.
anyone's here to speak on behalf or against it. Luke, I have a question. So the idea is we'll end up with a consistent right-of-way all the way down, but we'll have an inconsistent vacation as far as the width goes?
It would actually be probably opposite of that. We'd still have, it would be an inconsistent right-of-way probably. It's difficult to tell. That's kind of where we need to get into. We could either do a case where we have a consistent right-of-way width, but we reserve more or less easement, or we do smaller portion of vacation on one end and a larger portion on the other end. And that's really what we need to hammer out, exactly how we do that.
And we know where all the utilities are
Well,
out there?
let me weigh in on that a little bit. So there's, all the variables that are here is, even if we identify where the property lines actually are, what we're finding is that the roadway is probably not built in the center of that right-of-way all the way along that. And then, of course, the utilities are built a certain distance off of the existing roadway. So to define a consistent distance to vacate along that side is difficult, because there's nothing accurate to measure from at this point. So we're trying to get a feel for what we should appropriately vacate relative to the existing utilities, and find a way to adequately describe that. Is that fair to say?
Perfectly
I would
clear.
say so.
I think we get it. We just don't have enough information to make a sound decision right now.
That is what we've both said for the last 5 minutes in one sentence.
Perfect. Anyone else to speak in the open before I close it? Seeing none, I'll close the open and ask for a motion a second to table.
Are we doing tabling that?
We'll just table it until they get the surveys done
I'll
to
make a
find out what
motion
we
to
have.
table it till we get more information from city staff.
Motion by Mr. Arnold, second by Mr. Dolly. Any discussion on that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Fourth item is the Watertown Community Center Addition plat.
All right. As you stated, next item is the plat of the Watertown Community Center addition on property primarily owned by the city of Watertown with some right-of-way on adjacent properties. The plat here, where this is at, this is the future community center north of 14th Avenue between 11th and 19th Street. We've got here a representation of what that is. It's two lots. One lot, do I have the plat itself? I don't. The one lot is the primary area. It is 21 acres, is that right, Shane? 22 acres. And then there's a drainage outlot in the middle here where you can see the trees on this aerial image and a little bit more area. Right-of-ways on this are 66 feet wide on what would be 15th Street heading to the north, and 18th Avenue on the north edge of the property. So again, 15th is 66 feet wide, 18th is 66 feet wide, and then the additional appropriate 40 feet, accounting for a total of 80-foot right-of-way here on 14th Avenue. That's what is platted. The reason that the adjacent property owners are also signed on this is because there are small portions, or are also involved in this plat, is because there are small portions that are involved, added on to that right of way to make it a total of 66 feet on both the east and north sides. Are there any questions for me?
Thank you, Luke. I'll open the public hearing if there's anyone to speak on behalf or against the plat. Luke, is the Watertown Community Rec Center the only thing that will go on this lot? Is it encompassing the whole lot as we look at it?
That's my understanding, that that's the only use proposed for this property.
And we go 15th up one side over to 18th, and those are the right-of-ways that we recommend for the usage of those roads?
Correct. And that's also what was in the master plan, if I recall, that you had worked on.
I think so too. Is 18th, does that go over to the edge of their lot? Did the school finish that one all the way over to the edge?
I'd have to ask.
18th is currently constructed over to the edge of this lot.
And this will draw it over to the corner of 15th and 18th.
Correct.
Is there any talk about finishing 18th all the way over to 19th?
Not yet at this point, but we expect that to come forward soon.
That was discussion we had quite some time ago. We thought that'd be a nice loop to get out from that middle school area, actually. I close the public hearing. Can I get a motion and a second for approval? Motion by Mr. Dolly. Second by Mr. Arnold. Any discussion on, any questions on the plat?
On this, are these both going to be full streets when they do it, or?
Correct.
Yeah, at this time, the street is being constructed up to the south entrance of the rec center along 15th Street. Next year or the following year would be improvements to the remaining portions of 15th and 18th is what we anticipate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item number 5, Lions Park, intersection First Avenue Northwest and Third Avenue Northwest to rezone.
Thank you. This item is a request initiated here by the city to rezone multiple legally described properties to agricultural district, which is this is Lions Park is where it's at. You can see a little red circle here. The area that we're talking about, and I'm using a pointer that's difficult to see, but the area we're talking about rezoning is a city-owned property in this area around here and up to the railroad and then back up here to have that zoned agricultural, as is the rest of the parks. You can see to the north, you've got the zoo, the parks going up this way. You've also got some of the open space down here, also zoned agricultural, more or less to be consistent. The primary reason that we're talking about doing this is because the area that is actually used for the park is currently zoned PUD. And for those of you on the board that have gone through a planned unit development process, you're aware that every time there's a change to the planned unit development, that needs to go all the way back through you and then back through the council, whether if it's a change just to add a structure or change grading, any of that is supposed to go all the way through. The point is, rezoning it to an agricultural zoning designation would, one, be consistent with how the rest of parks are zoned, and two, it would allow it to just get a building permit if they want to put up a picnic shack or something. And so that's where this came in. And you can see on the map, I can get into more detail where this is, but you can see some of it's zoned R2A, some of it's zoned industrial, but the bulk of it is zoned PUD.
Thank you for that. I'll open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the rezone. Blake had a question.
I did, or more of a comment, I guess. I really like all the development and improvements that are taking place in Lions Park, and the rest of the community does too, because that place is packed with kids and families all the time. But there's no pedestrian route of traffic to get into Lions Park. The bike trail is on the west side of the bridge, and they have to cross the bridge on the road, or coming from the east side, there's no sidewalk all the way down, so they're going to be in the road there too. Every time I go by there a couple times a day to and from work, I see, kids walking on the road or biking on the road. I just think it'd be nice if the city could lead by example and install sidewalk along there or some route of safe traffic.
Shane, city sidewalk plan. Do we have
Yeah,
one?
I'll comment on that. That is on our radar. We've had other comments with regard to that as well. That bridge over the river there on Third Avenue is scheduled for replacement in the coming years. In fact, we've reached out to try to get some big grant funding for the study that has to come first. But we'll address that sidewalk accessibility issue during that project and probably extend that an appropriate distance on either side of the river as well. So it is something that we've recognized and we'll take care of when we do that project.
How about tying into the sidewalk to the east into the residential area there?
Yeah, we'll have to, that'll be something we'll have to look at, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? With that, I'll close the public hearing. Ask for a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Stein. Second by Mr. McGuire. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6 is the listing of the commercial residential uses and a conditional uses in the I-1 and I-2 zones, an ordinance amendment.
Sure, this next item, and I've only got one slide here. Next item is a zoning ordinance amendment initiated by this board at the previous meeting. It would be about a month ago now. During the May 5th Planning Commission meeting, staff notified the board that at least one fitness facility is located in an I-1 zone property and that there was inclination of a gymnastics facility, which was previously in an I-1 property, looking at an I-2 zone property. Fitness or similar recreational uses are not listed as allowed in the industrial district, and that's where the initiation started. Now, the proposal defines a commercial recreational use, which is very similar to a recreational use definition, only it adds in the commercial portion. I will happily read it to you if you would like, but it was provided in the packet and has been online for a week. The other primary component to that is to list commercial recreational uses as an allowable conditional use in the I-1 and I-2 districts. That obviously is not specifically spelled out today, but it is the proposal in here. From standpoint of putting this report together, the idea was give you, pros and cons towards it, towards the approval of it, or denial. Reasons that would support it would be that we're aware of at least 2 facilities which have operated in the I-1 district in the past without complaint or conflict with adjacent land uses. A denial of the amendment would likely would likely have us needing to look at ordering those places out of the I-1 district if they are there. And it would allow opportunity for infill business with previously constructed contractor shops and storage buildings. These buildings with steel siding, high walls. Reasons to deny the amendment would be allowing recreational uses would be in harmonious with heavy and light industrial uses, which is listed as one of the purposes of the industrial district. Light industrial shipping, receiving, and shift work. The traffic patterns in parking could conflict. I know in other communities we've heard that causes a conflict just by time of day and amount of parking, just expectations and how they're handled in between them. That has caused problems in other communities. Allowing recreational commercial uses in the industrial district increases likelihood of future conflict between lawfully allowed uses. The example there is where we used to have the prohibition on liquor sales within a certain distance of daycare centers. The similar conflict potentially could exist here. And then also the amendment is not supported by Watertown Fire Rescue, and I know that Chip is here to address any questions as well, but I included some notes he had stated to me. If a malfunction occurs at a manufacturing facility being lawfully operated in an industrial district, the potential for large fires, explosions, and chemical release that threatens public safety is larger. West Texas had a large explosion in 2013 that had 15 fatalities and 260 injuries. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board noted a large contributing factor to the large injuries was proper zoning was not in place or enforced. Recreational uses in high-walled facilities are allowed in commercial districts. Allowing recreational activity in these areas could affect the efficiency of emergency response. The responders would have more people to evacuate, which takes time and resources. These resources should be used to mitigate an immediate threat, be it chemical or fire exposure. And then also, the note was also added from fire rescue that fire rescue also recommends removal of daycares unless they're accessory to an industrial business, restaurants, and hotels from industrial districts, removing commercial uses from industrial districts.
So, taking a step back, we've got what tends to be in recent years, some types of gyms and some gymnastics facilities that tend to gravitate into that industrial zone due to the type and size of buildings that work for them, and it's convenient. Moving backwards, a couple weeks ago, they talked to us, and there was a building that they left from an industrial zone that they're moving into another one in an industrial zone, and we thought, well, what we'll do is we just need to wordsmith our ordinance a little bit to make them compliant. In hindsight, I talked to you guys a little bit over the last few days, and you thought it could possibly be hasty just to add commercial recreation facilities into an I zone, possibly look at, we used to have a separate industrial zone that allowed it, correct?
Yes, several years ago, a separate industrial district was created, and that's where Dakota Gold Gymnastics was at that time, ahead of its permitting. That's what was created at that time, so a special zoning district existed.
Was an IA, do you
Yeah, it
remember?
was an
I
I1A.
vaguely remember years ago, and what we did is we got rid of that zone, and I remember when we did, First District said it's gonna come back and haunt you. You might not wanna get rid of that zone at that time, and we did. And now here we sit coming back going, are we better off to modify our existing zone? Which the danger of that is you could open up a Pandora's box and have something you didn't want at a later date, or do we come out and redo the ordinance, adding a zone? On the flip side of that, you've got some safety issues that Chip has some concerns with that, what we're trying to do as a community is trying to find a place for, we're trying to do a quick fix for something that's needed, that's there, but we also don't want to do the wrong thing. From a safety standpoint, we don't want to do the wrong thing. From a future standpoint, we modify the ordinance to find out we've opened up a Pandora's box and now we get too much of the wrong stuff in the wrong place. But that's kind of where we're at, correct?
That's basically it. I mean, the past track that had been taken was that we had the special zoning district. That's obviously not in front of you today. If you were interested in going down that route, that would be something that would be a different ordinance amendment. I'd have to think of pros and cons on that, but I mean, in the end, the pros would be that you would at least tie that down to specific areas, whereas if it's a listed conditional use in both I-1, I-2, no holds barred in the rest of the districts.
Right, by having its
but-
own zone, we can say that's the zone for it. By doing a conditional use, in a sense, by conditional use, allowed them to dot into any of those I zones.
But that's not without its downsides as well, from terms of proximity to other uses as well.
Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing, because I know Chip has an opinion.
Yeah, Chip Primus, Watertown Fire Prevention Officer. The zoning it's a tool for safety also. And like Luke took my thunder by reading my letter, but that's all right. It was West Texas, that explosion, and the zoning was found to be one of the faults of why there was so many injuries. And I think we have, all the commercial areas are allowed you to have these gyms in there. And there's plenty of, I have to think about, it's not easy, by no means being the guy sitting in the spot saying these people have had these little gyms in these contractor shops, to leave. Well, contractor shops aren't built for an assembly use, they're built for contractors. And then they modify these to fit whatever needs they want, and it's never been permissible, and we have to be the ones to enforce that. But also the different zonings, that just opens up another worm, you know, for, if we do zoning in these areas, a spot zone is what they would be, just to say that they're legal on paper, but they're still right across the street from a plating operation or you know, heavy combustibles in these areas. Just the activities. So you know, I'd
One
rather
second,
ask-
Chip, could you pull it up as to where this particular one is?
Right. So I'm asking the board to enforce this zoning, that, you know, we use this as a tool when we're responding to an area, we know it's industrial, we're not expecting to pull up and it happened to be during a recreational group meeting time and there's 50 more cars and, you know, or 15 more cars and a bunch of kids, you know, that were just dropped off. You know, we have to deal with that first, and we really need to be dealing with the emergency right away, because in these industrial areas, the faster that we can mitigate what's happening, the less threat it is to the general public as a whole. But if we have to take our resources for evacuation, then that's time, and time's critical for us. So I don't believe this spot zoning stuff. The commercial, you know, I've had some arguments, they talked about commercial zones, they don't like them because they have tall sidewalls too. Well, we just talked about this at this board, you know, a few weeks ago, and residential garages, how we can make those sidewalls more appealing to the eye. Well, I agree that we can do this too also in commercial areas too. So, any questions, just let me know.
You got it up there? Can you point out where this building that brought us to this point?
Sure. We've got a property here, and we've got a property here that it was initially brought up to. There's also, my understanding is there's another fitness facility and a building that's been constructed here as well.
And they're in the I-1 zone.
This one's I-1, this one's I-2.
I-1's heavy industrial, I-2's light industrial.
Other way around.
I-2's heavy industrial.
Yep.
Is there any heavy industrial in there, or is it all light industrial?
Right. Yes, this is a heavy industrial plating manufacturing place. They have lots of chemicals that they use in their process. And yeah, these are fine when everything's working well, but if there is an accident or a malfunction in the processing part, there can be catastrophic things happen. And we can Google that, industrial accidents, and they're all over the country. So that's why the fire department's opposed to this.
So the trick is, all our recreation places like to be where the land values aren't so crazy high and things are accessible, like soccer fields and ice rinks and new ballparks next to Williams Pipeline. You know, I mean, we see that all over where you get we're trying to afford the opportunity for recreation, but recreation is always in the low-lying, flooded lands, the lands that aren't quite as valuable because it works. So at our board, we're at a point where we've been asked to, should we consider putting a conditional use in this industrial zone for recreational facilities, or do we come up with a separate zone for a recreational-like facility adjacent to an industrial zone, or do we use our existing zoning that we have in the commercial side? And when we talked about it originally, it was, well, the buildings that these generally use are high sidewalls, kind of storage-like industrial-looking facilities. They would look and fit in there, and that was the direction we went with. Now we've got people that have businesses in these areas that we are now taxed with. Can we find a way to make it, it's easy to find a way to make it compliant, but it's not always easy to make sure it's safe, and that's what Chip's point is, so.
I did reach out to Sioux Falls, you know, because I'm sure they had this before in Sioux Falls Fire. You know, they agreed with, you know, the research that I'd found, and and that they don't allow them in any industrial areas too. They're in the commercial areas. Just food for thought.
Luke, what zones are they allowed in without any conditions?
They're listed in the C1, C2, C3, and business park districts, as well as like public facilities are listed in the residential district as well. They're like the school, the gym, that sort of thing is listed in the residential districts.
Everything but industrial.
Yes.
And just one more thing and I'll be done. I know it's difficult for the board, because I know these kids need a place to go. And it's difficult to be the ones that say, no, you can't be there, but it's also difficult to be the ones to, if an accident does happen, that we let it happen. That these kids were in this area and the accident happened. We were the ones that said, well, it's okay, we'll spot zone it, we'll do this, we'll make it good on paper, but, we have to protect the public. It's our responsibility. Because they're not aware of what's going on in these other buildings. They're just looking for a place to go. And we have to be the ones responsible enough to think about this and, protect them as a whole. That's all I got.
Could you help me out here? How did these businesses get permits to locate in this, in this apparently non-conditional use zone?
The what winds up happening, and I'm probably the last person that should be answering this, but what winds up happening is that the structures are built, there is no occupancy permit system. So once the structures are built, they go in unless they need a permit for modifications on it. Am I right there, Ken and Chip?
Yep, unless they need a permit to modify something or rebuild something, we'd never know they're going in there until after they're in there. So if they would come in at that time and want a permit, then we'd say, well, it's not allowed for that, but otherwise, no permit, they just go.
And that's it's difficult with these contractor shops, because they come in and they build the shop. This is a contractor shop. Well, we've issued the building permit, we do our walkthrough, and then all of a sudden, we're assuming they're all contractors, and we become aware through things like this that, well, there's a gym in there.
But isn't the building permit issued under the premise that the building is going to be used for an authorized, function?
Yes. Ken will let Ken. Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, it is, but once the renter comes to the door, they're gonna take anybody that pays the rent.
Not anybody. Everybody tries to accommodate everyone. What's good for one, I mean, in this case, the Dakota Gold is in an I-2 zone, and the neighbor wants to buy the building, and they bought the building, and now 300 gymnasts don't have a place to go. Somebody else comes up and goes, hey, I got a building that'll work for you, and they try to make it work, and to find out that it's not compliant in that zone, so now we're taxed with making the hard decisions as what's the right and wrong thing. What we have in front of us now is, what we asked to have in front of us now was an amendment to our ordinance that would allow commercial, or let me see how that's read, recreation facility in the I-2 zone. So that's what they've done. They've modified the ordinance for us and added item number 5, commercial recreational facilities, as a conditional use in the I zone, and we'll be taxed on voting on what we ask them to do for us with different information, more, I'm not going to say different information, but more information than we had before. And it is a tough one from a safety standpoint. And Chip, you said there's a metal plating facility across the street?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, the safety is definitely a top priority for concern here. And, initially I thought about this being a conditional use and it having to come back before the board so we could at least take a look at the neighbors and what was around them before we approved any use. But the flip side of that is, once we approve the conditional use, the neighbors could change and the, 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 the area. So we got to think about both the present and the future here.
Anyone else for the public hearing?
Luke, did you say that there are some daycares in there already, and these that would be affected, that have to be told they couldn't be open?
Not as a part of this action. I think what was going on there, and Chip, you could straighten me out,
Yeah.
but the point that was made was that in future actions, it would be suggested that we remove from the industrial districts. Currently, it's listed that you could have daycares, restaurants, and hotels, and the suggestion from fire rescue is that we take those out as well. The only thing about daycares, Chip and I had this conversation, daycares were allowed in there more than likely because, remember, we had a daycare in, that was out in the industrial park out by the airport, primarily for the people that worked out there.
That's one of
That
those
makes
things
perfect
that.
sense,
No,
you
it
know.
doesn't. Doesn't make any more sense than putting gymnasts across from a plating company.
And-
It would make convenience sense, but it didn't make safety sense.
And that's right, and, you know, we didn't address that at that time, and we're back at the same game. You know, are we gonna allow this again? You know, if that came up today, I wouldn't allow that. You know, it just, you know, do we keep repeating what we're doing, or do we fix it now and think of the safety aspect of it? That's what I'm asking for.
You know,
This will be a freestanding building, brand-new building they're anticipating putting up, or are they gonna go into, or is it a building
They go-
that's completely empty and they're just gonna refurbish it, or?
A refurbished existing building.
Okay, now like Watertown Box, as an example,
Is it right there?
I don't know today if they do, but a few years ago, they put an addition on there and did recreation in that building for all the employees to use and take advantage of, which they did, I suppose, at noon hours and various things, but then, of course, after hours, they come and use it for the same purpose. I know in Sioux Falls, I can think of two examples that are pretty close to home of big companies that are doing the same thing. They'll put a recreational area within their large manufacturing plant so the employees can go up there and work out at noon hour and so forth. No. So this isn't that, or would we be limiting that to, saying none of these places can do that anymore, or?
No, we're looking at, we're limiting that a different entity can come in, private or whatever, build a building.
Strictly run
or- Yeah, you know, that like the gym you're talking about, or the daycare, that if a business wanted, that's an accessory use. If an industry wanted to have a small area where they could have a few kids that, you know, they want to provide daycare, or we all know that, you know, working out and things are good for your employees to more productivity, so then they have their little workout area, and that's provided. That's just an accessory use to their.
But the hard thing is you're still encouraging them to be in a hazardous area, which if you're going to be safe, if you're talking safety, if we don't want them near there, we want them there as little as possible if it's a dangerous area, right?
But they're already there working, is
Right.
the point there.
I still think they shouldn't be there very darn long if it's going to blow up, you know? But, you know, I mean, you look and go, it's kind of you know, do we want a recreational facility in there? What's the difference if I have a recreational facility or if I have a workout gym for 1,500 employees there? They're still in a line of fire. It's kind of the same thing. I'm not against it. You know, what can we do to make every industrial exposure as safe as possible? I wouldn't want to be across the street from somebody that I'm worried about a fire. And we should be more proactive on those places to make sure they don't get on fire and they're up to code so we don't put other people. And, you know, if somebody wants to put a gym or a daycare in his business, we should be able to say, that sounds like a good idea and everybody's safe, but
But you have to use the argument also that these companies that have these employees that work there, they are familiar with you know, the threats, and they're familiar with their surroundings, what's going on. They know the place by the back of their hand, compared to an independent building that somebody uses. People come in and drop their kids off or go there to work out. They don't know the surroundings. They don't know what's in these other structures. You know, it's being familiar with your surroundings, so you have to use that argument too.
Where's OSHA in all this?
OSHA does not, they don't deal with the zoning.
I mean, but as far as the safety part, with knowing that there's people inside these buildings that you know, there's certain things that would have to comply with, and I'm sure there's certain rules with daycares and so forth.
OSHA wouldn't have any regulation over it though, Jason, only during the construction process.
No, I'm talking about after, when they're in the business, you know, like Minnesota Rubber, when they were in business, OSHA was out there all the time, and if there was a daycare in there, there would have to be some requirements that OSHA would basically require for a daycare to be run in there.
For accessory use.
Right.
Well, I agree totally with what you're saying and the difficulty and the safety issue. The only thing, if we vote for this, I just want to make sure that we don't tell, I mean, I would not be in favor of telling any of these manufacturing places that no longer can you have an area in that building where your employees can come and work out and whatever you want to say, relax,
Right.
and get physically fit, mentally restored and go back to work, because that's a big thing now that
Right, and that
businesses
would
like to
be-
do that. So I don't want to limit that.
And this won't limit that. Those are an accessory
Yeah.
use to the building. It'd be like a bigger break room that they're building for those employees, so that wouldn't affect that at all.
So, again, just so I'm clear on this, Luke, so if the occupant in this building that you have the cursor pointed at had checked the city ordinances as far as allowed uses for that building, we really wouldn't be here today then.
Well,
Yes and no.
That's,
yeah, well, we would be here because they'd be asking for it because it's an easy fit for them. Well, easy isn't always safe.
and one thing that I do want to point out is they did ask before in a different part of town. And the answer at that time was, because it was zoned industrial at the time, at that time it was zoned I-1, not this property, the other place they were at. They asked, and what the community did is we created a new zoning district at that time that allowed it and a few other uses. And I think it was 5-6 years ago that zoning district was wiped off the map and we don't have it anymore. So it was being operated as a non-conforming use where it was, and we had other ones popping up. So to answer your question, if they had asked to do so, I mean, they could just as easily have brought forth a request in front of you to say, hey, can we rezone this? Can we add this as a use, something like that? We could just as easily be here.
And they did it. They did ask. They went into this building, and they found out it was not zoned correctly, and they came to us 2 weeks ago and said, hey, we want to do this. It's great for the kids. It's great for the community. And we all said, you know what? We think we could probably help you out with that. We're going to just wordsmith something into our zoning ordinance, and here we are. But as things more enlightening comes in and you look in hindsight, we told them, yeah, oh, no, that'd be a great spot for you. All we got to do is just add commercial recreational facilities in our I-2 zone, I-2 zone, and we can, but it's a conditional use, so we'll get to look at you every single time, and that makes, but at that time, nobody said, I got a plating company across the street, and the fire department's not going to be very happy about it.
How does this affect the other two fitness centers that you refer to in your notes here?
They're non-compliant if they,
So if we pass this, they would have to
they
just
could.
continue doing what they're doing?
If there was a substantial loss there, we wouldn't issue them a building permit to rebuild with them in there. Could we enforce the ordinance and say, get out of there?
We can.
Would we?
Depends on if we got the backing to do so.
I mean, that's a question, say no here, you say no there too?
Going back full circle, they say, hey, we're a small community, there's limited ability, or opportunities for people. We try to make as much work as best we can. And so here we sit, and we got safety on one hand and the opportunity for the kids on the other hand, and we don't want to make a wrong decision like Chip says and find out 150 kids got hurt and it's our fault.
So again, just to be clear, approving the request would allow the recreational facility to stay.
No, they would
It
have
would-
to
it would
come to
allow-
us for a conditional use.
Yeah, actually, I was going to do a recap here, okay?
Right.
So here's where you sit. You've got a zoning amendment initiated by this board. in which the request, the amendment is to add commercial recreational uses in the I-1 and I-2 district. If you say yes, you will forward that on to the city council, who will hold 2 readings, and then that ordinance would then become effective, and then it would become effective 2 weeks after the second publication. So we're talking about assuming that the council would approve it after you, then it would become law, and then they'd have the ability to make an application for a conditional use after that. So we're talking 2.5 months from now, and 1.5 months from now, they could.
They
look
still
at
have to
making an
come back to
application.
us and ask for the conditional use. Right now, they don't have the ability to ask for a conditional use because it's not acceptable, so.
If you say no, and I just want to finish these 2 points. If you say no, there are 2 ways you could go with a no. You could say no to this, which would stop it in its tracks. From your standpoint, it would stop it. And then you could say, we're not interested in looking at we're not interested in initiating a new zoning district. That's one option. Or 2, as a part of that, you could say, no, but we're interested in looking at a new zoning district. Those are basically, obviously, you can think of 1,000 other examples, but those are the 3 that have been discussed here.
More than likely, if we were to say no and say, we'd like to explore a new zoning district, that zoning district is gonna be required to be a certain distance from most I-2, I-1, heavy industrial anyway. So that's still gonna say, we're not gonna be able to allow them in or near these types of places.
It may or may not. Last time it didn't. It perhaps should have. It's hard to say.
You're better off to use a conditional use. But like Blake said, the problem with the conditional use is we look and go, hey, everything works good. You've got nothing dangerous around you. And then you give them the conditional use, and then a dangerous place moves in next to you. You could revoke the conditional use, but that would not be likely.
And the fire safety director is recommending a no vote.
Well, I'll close the public hearing since I don't see anyone else wanting to speak on it. What we'll do is, what we're going to vote on is our own request to add commercial recreational facility into the I-1 and the I-2 zone. We'll need a motion and a second for further discussion to take the vote. Could I get a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. McGuire. Second? By Mr. Hanson. Discussion. My thought is if we vote it down, we voted down what we asked, but it's with more information. It just kind of puts us back to square one. Is what do then we go back to our community hat and go, what do we do with this building and with these kids? I know they've been working in that building and they've been working out in that building, and they were happy that they had a place to go. And now we look and trying to take a look at the bigger picture, saying, well, if we do this to make a quick Band-Aid fix on something, we might accidentally cause greater problems later, but it still puts us back to square one.
I got a question. If they're going in front of the fire marshal and he says you can't do it because it's a hazard, can't that be shut down right there without coming in front of us?
If you have something on the books that says it's conditional use, right now, if not take this one out of the equation, let's just take another one of these other gyms that are already operating. We could go right now and send them a letter and says, this is not a proper place for this to be by occupancy, and you have to vacate, move. There's no options for them. There's no place for them to come back and appeal to in that situation because it's not in the zoning ordinance. If you have the conditional use in there, then they at least have an opportunity to come back, present their case, see what the surroundings is, and overturn our decision.
And we could also, in that condition, we could give them a conditional use to operate. Luke, this is a question to you. Could we give them a conditional use to operate for a period of time?
Yeah, you can limit a time frame on a conditional use.
And say you can be in here, but you've got to be out of here by a certain date if we want to clean up the zone.
That's correct.
I got a question for Chip. I got a couple of questions, actually. Number one, if they're not in compliance with you guys at the fire department, that can probably be shot down right there. And then number two, good question for Pat, how is any insurance company even able to insure that?
You know, and I have a question for you too, Chip, that, you know, I go back to when we were working with fireworks in the city limits and, you know, people are telling us, hey, oh, don't worry, we can fight this fire, this is not gonna get too bad, you know, there's different levels of explosives. When we have these industrial facilities that are there, you know, I find it hard to believe that the building could have damage to it that would damage everything in the surrounding area, that they don't have their own safety features that are required by the building code to be inside there to limit the destruction to be in their area, not a block away.
Well, one thing is, you know, everything they do is in a safe manner, and these processes as safe as they can be. But when accidents happen, equipment malfunctions, unforeseen reactions can happen, and it can be very detrimental. And that's, you know, all the safeguards in place, and, you know, I go through and I got a fire code book about 8 inches thick that, you know, I try to enforce it. I enforce every ones that, you know, I can, and that's what we go by. And they have chapters in the code book for, you know, businesses that are already existed in that space. You know, I don't walk into a new building and old building and with the new code says this. You know, the code refers to existing, say, industry, you know, existing factory, and I go by that chapter's fire codes of what's recommended or what has to be done. And, you know, letting them be in there, you know, that's, you're giving them permission, you know, but, you know, we don't know when an accident's going to happen. It could have happened, you know, tomorrow night. You know, by us as a board, you know, aren't we responsible? By okaying a conditional use, I think you're better off shooting this down, because you're okaying them to be there, even though we've had this discussion about, you know, what's safe.
And we haven't okayed, and
Right.
to be clear, there's no commercial recreational facilities in our city limits that have a conditional use to be in an industrial zone. No one has come before us and asked for this, nor have we given anyone permission to be in an industrial zone. What we're doing now is saying, should we put this in our code so we can look at these? Chicken or the egg? Chris is saying, hey, don't put it in there. You're never going to have to be put in a position to allow someone in there.
Well, one thing you have to think about too, you know, once you have your use, you give somebody a conditional use, we want all our industries in these I zones. That's where we want them, that's why we have these zones. And we want to cater to them. Well, now, you know, a different scenario, a different business wants to move in, and all of a sudden the person with the conditional use is there, and this other business bought this other building, and it's, you know, they're doing rendering. They're doing animal rendering, and it's okay in that zone, but it stinks terrible. And now the place that you're working out in stinks like, you know, a rendering process. They have total right to complain to whoever because of, you know, they have a conditional use to be in there. Am I not right? Am I right on that, Luke?
We see that a lot in other zoning districts and other areas as well, that once they're permitted, they've got as much right to the use of the property as the rest of them. Anyone that's permitted has got that unless you've had them sign a waiver, which may or may not have a lot of help.
And there are zones in the city right now where this is, you know, these places can be. That's the whole point. Why do we want to make a new zone? That's the question, you know. Why would we make a different zone You know, the only reason we want to make a different zone is to do a cookie cutter. And, you know, I'd be sitting up here again saying, you know, this is close to the I zone or this is in the I zone, but we want a cookie cutter. I'll have the same discussion for the rest of my career. You know, we have commercial areas, business parks for recreation, and that's where they should stay as far as public safety.
I think when it comes to safety, I've heard Chip and the fire department come before this board many times over the last few years. And I feel like they've always done everything they can, bent over backwards to work with the community and work with people and not take a hardline stance if they don't need to. But today I see you taking a pretty strong stance against this, and there's a good reason for it. I don't see you always doing that. You'll state your opinion, but there's some flexibility in there. And that's why I really believe we need to listen to him and what he's saying today. And it might not be the most popular decision in the community. I don't know how it's going to be perceived, but I do think it's the right decision.
Any other discussion? I think it just puts us back, more likely it's going to put us back to square one with the group, and we try to get the right minds together and get back to a drawing board and see what we can come up with.
Well, I'm just going to make a simple comment. We have talked all the ins and outs. We have identified where this type of operation is allowed within the city, and I think that we know where it for sure is allowed today. So the question is, do you need to allow any additional areas to be considered? And my gut instinct is that we probably have it adequately covered. But that's for you guys to decide if you want to entertain anything else.
Thank you. Any other, go ahead.
Had he looked other places? Why did he end up in this one anyway?
I'm sure it's more sidewalls, just existing facilities that would fit what their needs were today. It was an issue where there was, 250, 300 girls and boys that used this facility that in fairly short order was sold. And the new owner of the building needed to be in that building with his own fiberglass business, and so it kind of moved pretty fast. They're, trying to find a place as fast as they can that was available and open, and in a community like ours, there wasn't a lot of places. This one fit the structural needs of what they needed, but the environmental needs of where that was at probably, as Chip pointed out, probably isn't the best option.
Now, if I'm to be fair, they were previously in an industrial district, although not this one. You drive through and you do see other fitness sorts of facilities in industrial districts. It's a valid question to think about wanting to do it. I guess I can understand someone looking at it that way, is all.
I think it'll put us back to the drawing board, and I think we're going to need to work with First District pretty close to find out what other communities are doing. You know what I mean? To kind of educate us a little bit about, maybe we can make it work, and maybe there's some things that we need to add, just a little more background on it before we jump into something. We thought we had a quick fix, but it doesn't look like it's a quick fix. So, any other discussion?
Does a no vote mean they're out today?
The process involved, they would probably be pending while you guys are making your decision as well. I mean, I can't say that eventually it would all be solved cleanly, but the process of asking them to vacate would take a little while. So.
And to do that, it would be not only this one to vacate, but a lot of them to vacate. And it could open up a Pandora's box of a lot of things that are in a lot of zones that are not conditional uses, from bars. And half our bars aren't zoned attic, it could cause us to clean up a lot of stuff. But no, I don't think it means that they're on the street today, are they, Ken? No. That was an easy one. Any other discussion? Well, it's for a vote. What we're voting for is to add commercial recreational facility use. It's Resolution 2016-18, add commercial recreational facility into the I-1 and the I-2 zones as a conditional use. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Aye.
No.
The motion fails. Next item, old business, new business?
One item, I'll call it new business, just I've been doing it since I've been sitting in this chair. For what it's worth, I haven't had a chance to note to the couple of planning commission members that are on the Joint Jurisdiction Planning Commission, there are 2 items that will be brought before that Joint Jurisdiction Board for the June 20th meeting at 7:30 PM. Again, those will be the first 2 items we'll address and then move on. Monday, June 20th, is the 20th a Monday?
City council night.
It is city council night, that's 7:30 at night. Mhm. At the extension building. And so that'd be, I believe Pat and Dennis are on that board, Mark's the alternate. So contact me if you have troubles getting there and anything.
I do think I'm gonna be gone.
Okay.
that day.
Okay.
Let me look here. I am, yeah. I come back that day, but
Okay.
whether or not I'm back by 7 or 7:30, I don't know.
Okay, we will, we'll touch base. We'll work together in between, okay?
Okay.
No more items from me.
All right, thank you. No old business. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Stein, second by Mr. Dolly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.